Tonight, as the world softens around the edges and your breath begins to slow, we drift together into a quieter kind of history. The sort of history that murmurs rather than speaks. The kind that moves like a gentle tide across the shore of your mind. So just let your shoulders fall a little heavier, your jaw loosen, and your eyes half close as we begin. Because this evening, we travel backward, far, far back, to a Europe that was trying, quietly, shakily, and with great uncertainty, to remember how to live again, not the dramatic Europe of knights and banners, not the bustling Europe of trade and noise, but a Europe that had been hollowed out, softened, thinned by grief, and left to rebuild itself one breath at a time. And yes, if you find these sleepy wanderings comforting, a little like resting under a warm blanket of calming stories, you can always tap that like or subscribe button. It helps more than you'd think, and I'm always quietly amazed, truly amazed, at the places people listen from. If you're awake enough to comment, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. It never stops surprising me how many of you drift off to sleep at the same time all around the world, under totally different skies. But for now, settle in. Find that cozy position where your body feels safe and supported. Take a slow breath in and a slower breath out, because we're heading softly back to the year 1453. A time when the great roar of the Black Death had finally settled, leaving behind an echo, a silence, a stillness that lingered like mist over a cold morning field. And when you arrive, when you open your eyes in this imagined past, you find yourself lying in a small wooden house in England a full 35 years after the plague tore through Europe like an invisible fire. It is quiet, strangely quiet, and you feel a faint appreciation for whatever you're lying on right now, because the mattress beneath you in this world is made only of straw, lumpy and uneven. Beneath your shoulders, you survived. That's the good news. And the bad news? Well, the world you once knew is gone, changed in ways no one could have predicted. You awaken slowly as though rising from a dream. Your eyelids flutter open, and immediately it's not what you see that strikes you first. It's the absence of familiar sound. No morning chatter drifting from the village square. No laughter of children racing through the streets. No rhythmic hammering from the blacksmith's shop. Just a soft, heavy blanket of silence. The kind of silence that settles over places where too many lives have been lost. Too many doors left unopened. You stretch, your muscles sore, stiff from work that has become heavier than any single body should bear. Everyone who survived the great dying feels this tiredness, a tiredness that lives deep in the bones. But you roll over anyway, because life goes on, and the rough straw poking through the thin cloth beneath you reminds you of something oddly true. You actually have a mattress now. Before the plague, a person of your status, just a simple serf, would have slept directly on the packed dirt floor, maybe using old rags to keep warm. But when half the population disappears, well, suddenly there's more of everything to go around. More houses, more clothing, more tools, more land, more belongings of those who will never return to claim them. A strange inheritance from a tragedy no one wanted. You sit up slowly, your eyes adjust to the dim, dusty light filtering through the small square of a window. Your home is larger than the cramped hut you grew up in, because this house once belonged to the miller and his family, all 6 of whom were gone within a single week during that terrible year of 1348. You try not to picture it, the hurried burials, the overflowing churchyard, the mass graves dug when there were simply too many bodies and not enough living hands to carry them. The floorboards beneath your feet groan softly as you stand, real. Wooden floors, not dirt. You inherited more than a roof. The chest in the corner holds clothes that actually fit. There's a decent iron cooking pot hanging above the hearth. Even a pewter cup, an object once reserved for merchants or the wealthy. Catastrophe, you think, has a way of redistributing wealth, just never in any way you'd wish for. You pull on your tunic. Wool, soft, warm, not the scratchy hemp you once wore. It feels good, almost comforting. Though a small voice at the back of your mind whispers a reminder, this tunic once belonged to someone who died choking on their own blood. You try not to think about that either. Outside, your breath rises in pale little clouds. September in England has always carried a bite. But now the cold feels sharper somehow. Maybe it's the world itself, feeling emptier, or maybe when you've watched the world break, everything afterward feels a touch colder. You walk through the village of Little Wickham, and it stretches before you like a half-forgotten memory, familiar yet hollow. Houses sit abandoned, their doors open like tired mouths. Gardens overrun with weeds, fences leaning broken, forgotten, fields that should be gold with grain lie brown and bare. Before the plague, this little village held around 200 souls. Now, maybe 60. On a good day, your stomach growls. That's another secret they don't tell you about surviving disasters. Survival still requires breakfast. You walk toward the village centre. You pass the old well, where people used to gather every morning to exchange gossip, stories, laughter. Now the rope hangs frayed and thin, the bucket barely touching the water at the bottom. Everything is harder now, not because people are lazy, but because there are simply fewer hands, so much fewer. You pass the baker's shop, closed, still closed, has been for 3 years. Thomas the baker, his wife, his 2 sons, all gone. His apprentice tried to keep things running, but bread making isn't a skill you learn overnight. And the few loaves he produced were dense enough to probably use as building stones. So now everyone bakes their own bread, or tries to. Turns out, a lot of knowledge died alongside the people. All those little skills families passed down through generations, vanished in the space of a single season. You notice the faint smell of wood smoke curling through the morning air coming from the direction of the manor house, Lord Edmund's estate. It sits slightly apart from the village, quiet and imposing, though not as grand as it must have seemed before the plague. The manor, once bustling with dozens of servants, children and tenants, now feels smaller, emptier. The stone walls, thick and cold, seem to sigh under the weight of years and loss. Fewer chimneys puff smoke into the morning sky. Fewer voices echo from the rooms inside. You walk toward the manor with soft steps, your boots crunching over frost-covered grass. Each footfall feels deliberate, measured, almost ceremonial. Today, unlike most days before the plague, you carry a purpose that once would have been unthinkable. You are going to ask for more wages, a small request that carries enormous weight. Before, this would have been foolish, perhaps even dangerous. But today the world has shifted, and the power of scarcity lies in your favour. As you reach the heavy wooden door, the morning air feels colder against your cheeks. You lift your hand and rap gently, 3 deliberate knocks echoing faintly into the stillness. The sound seems louder than it should, reverberating through the empty space around you. Footsteps answer your knock, slow and measured. The steward, Richard, opens the door. He is a man visibly exhausted, his shoulders carrying the fatigue of someone who must now do the work of many. His eyes are tired, lined with the marks of long days and long losses. "Morning, Thomas," he says softly, his voice weary but polite. "My lord is in the solar. I'll let him know you're here." You step inside, the warmth of the manor contrasting sharply with the chill outside. Even here, in this supposed seat of power, there are signs of emptiness. Dust clings to the tapestries that hang limply on the walls, the colours muted with time. Long tables, once used for gatherings and meals for dozens, are now pushed against the walls and covered with cloth. The flickering candlelight catches on the cracks in the stone, illuminating a hall that is less a statement of wealth and more a quiet witness to survival. From the top of the stairs, Lord Edmund appears. He moves slowly, with the careful grace of someone who has aged not only by years but by grief. The plague did not take him, but it carved deep lines into his face, and his frame is thinner, frail in a way that speaks to exhaustion more than mere age. His clothes hang a little loose, and even their quality cannot disguise the subtle decline that the years of loss have wrought. "Thomas," he says softly, descending the stairs. Richard nods silently, acknowledging your presence. You step forward, heart steady despite the nerves that flutter in your chest. "My lord," you begin, "I would like to speak about my wages." The words hang in the quiet hall. A year ago, 6 months ago, such a statement would have been inconceivable. You would have risked punishment or worse. But today, with the world altered, With the labour pool dangerously thin, this conversation carries weight in your hands. Lord Edmund studies you, a shadow crossing his features. He had fewer workers now than ever, each of them essential. Every pair of hands mattered, every skill, every labourer who could tend the fields or repair the roofs. The balance of power has shifted subtly but surely. "What are you making now?" he asks finally. 2 shillings a week, you reply, your voice quiet, careful. But John, over in Great Wickham, he earns 3 shillings for the same work, with an extra measure of grain. Lord Edmund's jaw tightens. He begins to speak then. Pauses, inhaling slowly. "And what exactly are you asking for?" 3 shillings a week, you say, steady now and Sundays off, proper off, not just morning service, then back to work. For a moment, the hall feels heavier. The old Lord Edmund might have erupted, called guards, had you whipped or punished for even daring to speak. But the world has changed. This Lord Edmund cannot simply replace you. The fields need tending, the roofs mending, the manor functioning. Scarcity has rewritten the rules. He glances out the window at the brown stubble of unplanted fields, at the empty spaces where golden wheat should sway. The labour that needs to be done cannot be postponed. Finally, with a resigned sigh, he says, 2 shillings and 6pence, and Sunday afternoons off. It is more than you hoped, more than you dared to imagine. And still, it is a reminder, when the world needs you more than you need it, you gain power. Soft, quiet, but undeniable. As you walk back through the village, the cold air wraps gently around you. You pass the churchyard. The original cemetery overflowed decades ago, necessitating new sections. Then those filled too, until graves now scatter around the grounds like fallen leaves, quietly claiming space wherever there was room. Yet life continues. It insists, stubbornly, gently. Margaret is outside, hanging laundry behind her cottage. Her dress is too fine for a widow, though she wears it with understated dignity her husband, once the village's most successful merchant, is gone. Now she runs his small business herself, employing neighbours, trading, managing accounts, keeping the heart of the village quietly beating. She waves to you. You wave back, the simple gesture carrying more meaning than it might have once. There is a strange kind of possibility in this world, one born of survival and loss. Women running businesses, peasants negotiating wages, empty fields becoming opportunities rather than despair. The Black Death took so much, but it also left behind a world reshaped for those willing to take it. You walk toward your own fields, rented now on terms unimaginable to your father. The soil is dark, rich, promising. You brush it between your fingers, imagining wheat growing, enough to feed your family and leave a small surplus to trade at the market. Perhaps someday you might buy that empty property by the river, the one sitting unused since the Hartwell family died. The wooden plough feels solid in your hands. You guide it slowly, methodically, cutting furrows into the earth. It is good, honest work, chosen work. Here, you are the master of your labour, not the servant. The rhythm of the plough is soothing, hypnotic, a small, comforting repetition in a world that has so recently been chaotic. Around midday you pause for a meal, bread and ale. The bread is dense, imperfect, perhaps slightly burned on one edge, but it is yours, made from your own grain, grown by your own hands. The ale is coarse but warming. Smoke rises from chimneys across the village, fewer than before but stronger. The homes that remain are heated better, meals are heartier, clothes warmer. Survivors make do, and they make better. The afternoon stretches lazily as you return to the fields. Sunlight warms your shoulders, the plough cutting clean lines in the earth. In the distance you hear children playing, their laughter fragile but bright, carrying farther in the emptier village. It is a lonely sound, but also comforting. Life continues, stubborn and persistent. As the sun dips toward the horizon, you clean your tools and return home. Home to a house larger than the one you grew up in, to a meal more abundant than your parents might have imagined, to the quiet rhythm of life after catastrophe. Tomorrow will be similar. Fields to plant, tools to mend, conversations to be had with Lord Edmund. And slowly, Inevitably, the world begins to feel like it belongs to those willing to shape it. Evenings are calm now. You wrap yourself in wool. Blankets, the cold forgotten for a time, the soft weight of survival around you. Your thoughts drift to the future, to children who might one day grow up in a world where laborers have a voice, where widows can run businesses, where ordinary people can choose the rhythm of their lives. It is not the world before the plague, and yet it is better in quiet, significant ways. Even as night falls and the village slips into stillness, fewer voices than before, the ones that remain carry weight. Possibility lingers in the air, palpable, gentle, like mist rising from the fields. The Black Death took so much, but what it left is the subtle power of choice. A world rebuilt slowly, carefully, tenderly. By autumn, others follow your lead. 3 peasants in Little Wickham demand raises and receive them. Margaret hires neighbours to help with her merchant business, paying wages that would have been unthinkable before. Word spreads quickly through the small village, carrying hints of change and opportunity. Yet not everyone is pleased. Down in London, King Edward's court has begun to hear stories. Peasants becoming bold, lords paying more than they ever thought possible. The established order, carefully maintained for generations, now subtly unravelling. And the king is not happy. A travelling tinker arrives one late October day, his carts heavy with pots, pans, and more importantly, news. He tells of a new law, the Statute of Labourers passed by Parliament. No worker may demand higher wages than those paid in 1346. The copper pot you examine feels suddenly heavier in your hands. If you are caught asking for more, punishment follows, stocks, branding, hanging in some places. Laws, however, are one thing, enforcement is another. The tinker whispers carefully, knowing every ear might hear. Hard to punish a man when he is needed to harvest the grain. But still, the threat lingers in the air like frost over the fields. You lie awake that night, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. The house feels less like shelter, more like a fragile protection in a world where change has stirred both hope and fear. Progress, it seems, always provokes resistance and often anger. The next morning greets you with frost glinting softly across the fields. Each blade of grass sparkles faintly, catching the early light. Your breath drifts in soft clouds as you make your way toward the manor, the familiar path now carrying a new weight of uncertainty. The frost crunches underfoot, a quiet reminder of the season turning and of the harsh winters yet to come. When you reach the manor, the atmosphere feels different from yesterday. Lord Edmund is waiting in the great hall, but he is not alone. 2 men stand beside him, clad in the king's colours, swords heavy at their sides. Royal commissioners sent to ensure the enforcement of the new law, their presence quiet but menacing. The hall, once a place of routine negotiation, now feels tense, the walls seeming to close in ever so slightly. "Thomas," Lord Edmund says softly, "I'm afraid we must renegotiate our arrangement." One of the commissioners steps forward. He is young, perhaps 25, with hands soft from a life untouched by labour. "By order of King Edward," he says, voice clear and commanding, "all wages are hereby returned to their levels of 1,346. 2 shillings per week, no more." Your heart pounds, but your voice remains steady, trained by years of negotiation and survival. The commissioner's hand hovers near his sword hilt. "And if I refuse?" you ask quietly. His eyes meet yours briefly, a flash of impatience, then he gestures toward the door. "Then you will explain your refusal to the king's justice. Stocks in the village square await, along with brands heating in the forge." You glance at Lord Edmund, seeking any sign of support. His gaze remains fixed elsewhere, distant, exhausted. The power you felt yesterday, delicate and fleeting, seems to vanish. The precarious balance of scarcity, opportunity, and negotiation tilts suddenly back toward authority. The world, even now, is not without its rules. "I understand," you say finally, each word measured, deliberate. There is no anger, no defiance in your tone, only acceptance. The commissioners nod, satisfied with compliance, and the room relaxes ever so slightly. The frost outside glints in the windows, indifferent to the small but significant struggles within. Returning to the village, the air feels colder, sharper, and yet alive with possibility. Winter will come, and with it, long nights and early mornings. Yet even in this quiet tension, life continues its measured rhythm. Margaret tends her small shop, weaving baskets and sorting goods, her movements efficient but graceful. She nods as you pass, a faint smile acknowledging your shared understanding of the fragile new order. Your fields await, stretching like dark, fertile promises beneath the rising sun. The wooden plough feels familiar, the rhythm of labor comforting despite the uncertainties. With each furrow cut into the earth, the soil responds, rich and pliant. You imagine the winter wheat that will take root here, the grain that will feed your family and perhaps allow small ambitions, like purchasing that riverside property, to flourish. By midday, the village stirs gently. Children's laughter carries faintly across the fields, fragile sounds amidst the emptiness. They are fewer than before, but their presence is a reminder that the cycle of life persists, stubborn and steady. People work, repair, prepare for winter, and in their quiet industry they reclaim a sense of stability. You pause to rest, spreading a cloth on the frost-hardened ground. The bread is dense, hearty, and slightly uneven, but it carries the satisfaction of labor well done. The ale, coarse and warming, washes away some of the chill. Around you, smoke drifts from chimneys, the scent of wood and hearth merging with the crisp autumn air. The village breathes softly, each home a small beacon of resilience. Afternoon settles slowly over the landscape, casting long shadows from the skeletal trees along the paths. The sun warms your shoulders faintly as you return to the plough, tracing another furrow through the dark, inviting soil. Your thoughts drift lazily to the future. There is risk, certainly, in defying authority or negotiating new terms, but there is also reward in persistence and foresight. The world, shaped by catastrophe, has created spaces for those willing to act wisely. As evening descends, you finish your work, cleaning tools methodically, the ritual comforting in its predictability. Returning home, you are greeted by the warmth of the hearth, the subtle aroma of simmering stew. The house, larger than your childhood dwelling, now feels fully yours, not just as shelter, but as a testament to endurance, to the quiet accumulation of small victories. The night carries its own rhythm. Stars emerge faintly, and the moon casts a gentle glow across the village. You wrap yourself in thick wool blankets, the fabric warm and reassuring. Sleep beckons, carrying the promise of renewal. You think of the children who will inherit this world, where peasants can negotiate wages, where widows run businesses, where ordinary people may influence their own destinies. It is a subtle revolution, gentle yet profound, spreading quietly through the streets and fields. Days stretch into weeks. By late autumn, other villagers notice the shift. 3 more peasants demand raises and receive them, encouraged by the precedent set. Margaret hires neighbours to assist with her shop, paying fair wages. Even in the shadow of the king's law, the practical needs of survival shape decisions more than decrees or threats. The village begins to hum with cautious optimism, each household navigating the new balance between authority and necessity. Yet the statute of labourers remains a reminder of fragility. Word reaches Little Wickham that enforcement is inconsistent and that authorities may still intervene. Fear is a subtle companion drifting through empty streets and quiet rooms. But life, in its persistence, continues. Fields are ploughed, bread is baked, fires are lit. Each small act of work and care becomes a declaration of resilience, a quiet defiance of both death and oppression. Winter comes gradually, frost creeping over fields, coating the village in a delicate white. The days shorten, the mornings chillier, the nights longer. Inside, families gather near fires, sharing warmth, stories, and modest meals. The Black Death, though long past, remains a shadow, shaping conversations, cautioning decisions, guiding how the community moves forward. Yet there is also growth, subtle and steady. Where death once concentrated scarcity, survival now generates opportunity. You continue to tend your land, observing changes in the village with a sleepy, gentle awareness. Windows glow with firelight, laughter occasionally drifts on the cold wind, and the village breathes quietly under the weight of both loss and renewal. Every ploughed field, every loaf of bread, every measured wage becomes a small act of reclaiming what was almost lost. Spring arrives slowly, painting the fields with the first faint green shoots. Life, once thinned and fragile, begins to show signs of abundance. The villagers plant more crops, repair structures, and nurture the fragile economy that has emerged from devastation. Children run through streets that were empty for decades. Women manage shops, men negotiate terms, and everyone adjusts to a new, subtle equilibrium. The quiet persistence of daily life becomes a gentle rhythm, a soft lull that carries the promise of stability. By mid-year, the village hums with muted energy. Fields grow golden with wheat, gardens flourish, and small gatherings occur in the square. News from London drifts slowly to the village. Enforcement of the statute of labourers remains uneven. Practical needs often outweigh decrees, and in some places, lords quietly bend rules to retain scarce labour. The precarious balance of authority and necessity remains, yet life presses forward, steady and persistent. As you lie at night, blankets drawn tightly around you, the village quiet and calm, you think of the future. The Black Death reshaped everything: death and loss, scarcity and grief. Yet in the shadow of catastrophe, the survivors inherit more than just land or possessions. They inherit choice, opportunity, and a subtle power to shape their destinies. In these quiet moments, with the world dimly lit by the moon and the wind murmuring against shutters, you understand something profound. Survival alone is not the reward, it is what follows: the reclaiming, the rebuilding, the gentle shaping of a world remade. That defines life after catastrophe, and as sleep finally claims you, the village slumbers with you. The fields rest beneath frost or snow, the fires burn low but steady, and in every quiet corner, the pulse of possibility beats gently. The Black Death took so much, yet it left behind the tender, slow beginnings of a world where even the smallest hands, the quietest voices, and the most ordinary lives hold value and potential. As you wander slowly back through the village, the evening light soft against the rooftops, you notice the familiar well at the centre of the square. A small crowd has gathered around it, murmuring quietly, voices low but edged with urgency. Margaret is there, standing among farmers from neighbouring villages, her posture calm yet purposeful. The villagers speak in soft tones, words carrying over one another in a murmur that rises and falls, like the gentle sway of wheat in the fields. It is clear that news has travelled quickly, and that some understanding, unspoken yet deep, has taken root. The world is changing, and life cannot return to the way it once was. Someone says quietly, "We are the ones who do the work. Without us, the kingdom cannot stand." Another voice follows, "Deliberate and unhurried, dead men cannot plant grain." You join the circle, feeling the tension that hums like the quiet before a summer storm, a slow, persistent electricity in the air. These are people who have seen the fragility of freedom, tasted it, and are no longer willing to let it slip away. Margaret steps forward, her voice carrying easily across the group, calm but firm. "Perhaps it is time the king learns who truly sustains this land," she says, her words settling softly into the minds of those around her. That afternoon, you return to your fields, working under the gentle sun, the smell of fresh soil rising in the warm air. And then, on the horizon, you see it, smoke, thin columns at first, rising steadily from Great Witcham. Slowly, more smoke appears from Little Thornton and Wickfield. By evening, the horizon is dotted with warm orange glows, gentle flickers against the darkening sky. Greeneries, tax offices and manor outbuildings burn, their flames consuming structures rather than people, sending messages in whispers of fire. The revolution, quiet and tentative at first, has begun. It spreads softly, subtly, like a stream winding its way through meadows, gathering strength as it moves. Change begins quietly. At first, a tax collector receives nothing but cold stares. A royal commissioner finds himself unwelcome in a village that once bent to his command. Sometimes the resistance is subtle, empty homes, the quiet absence of work. Sometimes it is bolder, stones flicking from hedges in the dim light. By winter, the movement grows, spreading across villages and fields. Travelling merchants, when brave enough to cross the roads, bring news from afar. Peasants march toward castles in Kent. Workers in Essex refuse to harvest grain for lords who deny them fair wages, and entire villages in Yorkshire quietly vanish, seeking better lives in more welcoming places. The lords, accustomed to absolute authority, find themselves powerless. Lord Edmund tries. Threats first, then bargaining, and finally, a form of pleading he would never have considered before. I know the commissioners suggested 2 shillings, he offers hesitantly, but perhaps 2 shillings plus expenses, allowances for food and extra grain rations. You pretend to consider his offer, though inwardly you relish watching his discomfort.
Food allowances,
you ask softly, letting the words linger. Twice weekly meat, good bread, ale with dinner, and housing. You may remain in your current homes, rent-free. Not everything you had before, but enough, he adds, and you nod, understanding the quiet truth behind it. Laws are just words on parchment when reality does not cooperate. His grip is desperate as you shake his hand, a silent acknowledgement of the new balance of power. Winter descends slowly over the village, a heavy, restful quiet falling across roofs and fields. Letters arrive with increasing frequency, carried by nervous messengers who do not linger. Reports from across the kingdom are rarely good news for anyone wearing a crown. When half a population disappears or refuses to obey, not only are workers lost, but the entire social fabric weakens. Authority that once seemed unshakable is now fragile, and once people begin to question assumptions about who belongs where, those questions echo endlessly. Spring brings more than warm breezes and fresh blooms. It brings organized uprisings larger than before, with leaders and armies and demands. Peasants, tired of being peasant, begin to shape their own destinies. Tyler of Kent is the name that travels on merchants' whispers and villagers' conversations. Margaret tells you quietly, while you hammer nails into her roof, that Tyler commands 10,000 men, all armed, all determined. Before the plague, such an assembly would have been unthinkable. Survival after catastrophe teaches a lesson few others can. The impossible is often possible, if necessity and courage coincide. What does he want? You ask. Softly. Margaret's reply is measured, calm. An end to enforced labour, fair wages, punishment for corrupt officials. She pauses, her voice barely a whisper, then adds, "It sounds reasonable to me." By early summer, the movement is visible even to casual eyes. Smoke rises gently from tax offices. Streams of refugees quietly flee areas where battles have begun between royal armies and peasant militias. Then, one soft morning in June, you notice armed men settled in the village square. They are neither fully soldiers, nor merely peasants, but something in between. Faces lined by labour, hands hardened by work, carrying a mixture of tools and weapons. Their leader, a woman, stands tall among them, commanding attention by her calm presence alone. "We are heading to London," she announces, her tone even and measured, "to present our demands to the king. Anyone who wishes to join is welcome." The parchment she holds lists fair wages, the abolition of forced labour, and accountability for corrupt officials. The villagers murmur among themselves, weighing risks against hope. Lord Edmund appears, flanked by his remaining guards, his voice faltering and unsteady. The leader's calm gaze, steady and unwavering, reminds all that the king depends on them far more than they depend on him. That evening, as the rebels settle into the village pasture, you reflect quietly on the life you have rebuilt since the plague. Margaret has decided already, selling her business to a cousin and volunteering to organize supplies for the march. You pause, surveying the house you have nurtured, the fields tilled with care, the small life grown from ruins. Finally, after a deep breath, you say softly, "I'm coming." Survival is more than mere existence. It is about constructing a life worth protecting. The following morning you lock your door, leaving a note for Lord Edmund, and join the steady line of travellers heading south toward London. Farmers, craftsmen, laborers, some carrying weapons, others tools, all carrying hope. The land you traverse tells stories of past devastation and careful recovery. Burned fields and empty villages speak of destruction, while new construction, repaired roads and flourishing crops quietly tell of resilience. Along the way, travelers share soft stories of injustice and survival. Grain seized, wages halved, villages burned. By the third day, your group grows to nearly 1,000. By the fifth, rumors spread of converging groups from across the kingdom. Tens of thousands march together, unified by hope and quiet determination. At night, you camp atop a gentle hill overlooking the Thames. In the distance, faint smoke and lights shimmer from London. The stars overhead are familiar, the same that witnessed the plague years. You feel the slow, steady weight of accomplishment and of change yet to come. The city stretches out before you in the dim light, a sprawling expanse of stone walls, spires and towers, surrounded by countless camps of people who have walked hundreds of miles to seek justice. Your group finds a quiet place on Blackheath among the Kent rebels. Tyler stands before them, smaller than expected, but with a presence that demands attention. Tomorrow, we enter the city not as conquerors, but as free people seeking justice, he says, his voice calm but carrying across the hillside. The crowd murmurs agreement, faces illuminated by the soft glow of evening. Around you, stories are shared. A miller dreams of cooperative mills. A weaver imagines guilds run by craftsmen. Excitement hums softly in the air, mingling with tension, awareness that the coming days will define lives for generations. Night drifts slowly into morning, grey and misted. Thousands rise from camp, gathering belongings, forming loose columns that stretch along the horizon. The march into London begins quietly, deliberately. Narrow streets open to accommodate the river of people, flowing past shuttered homes, curious onlookers, and occasional cheering from windows. The wealthy quarter brings tension, stones fly, windows shatter, and John of Gaunt's residence, the magnificent Savoy Palace, becomes a soft blaze against the morning sky. Flames lick the treasures within, tapestries, gold and furniture, all the accumulated wealth extracted from labouring hands, consumed in a gentle, deliberate fire of quiet justice. Even as the palace burns, Tyler moves through the crowd, reminding all that their purpose is fairness, not vengeance. Freed prisoners wander the streets. Centuries of legal records vanish quietly in smoke, and the old order, designed to serve the wealthy, slowly dissolves. Evening falls across London, a soft hush settling over the chaos, the tower looming silently. Inside, the young King Richard waits, his youth clear even beneath the weight of crown and expectation. By morning, the king agrees to meet at Mile End, a safe field beyond the city walls, where both sides can gather and speak. Dawn breaks grey and misty, the morning soft, the thousands of people organised into loose columns, representatives from each region standing together. You walk with the Essex group, banners raised, listing human simple grievances, the end of enforced labour, fair courts, the right to hunt, fair taxes. Mile End is calm yet purposeful, the morning light soft against determined faces. And there, on a raised platform, the young king waits, guarded and tentative. Tyler's words, clear and measured, cut through ceremony and pomp. A gentle promise of change, a reminder that history moves not in leaps, but in quiet, deliberate steps. The morning mist lingers gently over Mile End, wrapping the assembled crowd in a soft, pale grey. Thousands of peasants, craftsmen and labourers shift quietly, their banners rising and falling with the breeze. Some banners are meticulously painted, others roughly fashioned, but each one carries a story, a grievance, a hope. The soft hum of voices blends with the occasional clatter of tools and the whisper of movement. You walk alongside Margaret, feeling the cool dew underfoot and the soft, steady rhythm of people around you. There is a sense of calm in the multitude, a quiet unity that seems almost impossible, yet here it is, palpable. Tyler moves among the groups with the gentle precision of someone who knows the weight of each word he speaks. He does not shout unnecessarily, yet every syllable carries far across the field. Today, he says, in a voice that is even but steady, we are not here to destroy. We are here to demand fairness, to claim what is ours, to remind those in power that their authority rests not on fear alone, but on the consent of those who labor. The words sink into the crowd slowly, like raindrops falling on a still pond, each one rippling outward. Around you, faces mirror the same quiet resolve. Some are young, still learning what it means to stand for themselves. Others are older, lined with years of toil, their eyes carrying the weight of experience and the faint, lingering memory of lives lost to injustice. Time seems to stretch in the cool morning air. The march into London is deliberate, careful, almost ceremonial in its rhythm. Columns of people wind through the streets, moving slowly, each step measured. You notice small details as you walk: a child's bare feet, a mother adjusting a shawl against the chill, the soft creak of wagon wheels over cobblestones. Occasionally a passerby peers from a shuttered window, curiosity softening their caution. Some offer bread, coins, or simple blessings, small gestures that remind you of the subtle kindness that persists even in times of upheaval. The city itself seems to hold its breath, awaiting the arrival of this quiet, determined wave of humanity. Entering the wealthier quarters brings a subtle tension. Houses built of stone, with gardens and courtyards, rise above the streets like silent witnesses to lives of comfort accumulated over decades. Someone throws a stone, an impulsive act, sharp against the soft hum of footsteps, and suddenly the air is alive with noise, broken glass, and the faint, acrid smell of smoke. John of Gaunt's residence, the Savoy Palace, begins to burn. Flames creep along timbered balconies and lick at golden treasures within. Tapestries fluttering gently before they collapse, and furniture carved from exotic woods gives way to quiet, consuming heat. It is a soft, inevitable fire, a reflection of long-suppressed grievances slowly finding their voice. Even in the midst of destruction, Tyler moves through the crowd with calm authority. "Remember," he says quietly to those nearest him, "we are here for justice, not revenge. Property can be replaced. Life, fairness, and dignity, these are harder to reclaim." Most people listen, drawn to the measured weight of his words. Outside the windows of London, freed prisoners wander, unsure, blinking in the sunlight, the warmth of liberation wrapping them in a gentle embrace. Legal records, centuries of decrees and precedents, crumble in the soft smoke, carried upward and outward on the morning breeze. The city feels lighter somehow, as if centuries of injustice have been lifted, even temporarily, in a quiet collective exhale. Evening falls slowly over the city. The streets, once narrow and winding, are now dotted with small groups of people resting, talking, quietly sharing food and water. The Tower of London looms silently in the distance, a fortress of stone and history, its gates locked but no longer oppressive in their presence. Inside, the young King Richard waits, his small frame tense beneath the weight of a crown too large for his age. You sense, as you walk past, a mixture of fear, confusion, and the faintest spark of comprehension that the balance of power is shifting, slowly, imperceptibly, yet inevitably. That night, you sleep in the gentle remains of a tax collector's office. The ledgers, once filled with meticulously recorded debts, now crackle softly in the fire, sending small ribbons of smoke curling into the night air. Outside, London is alive in quiet motion, flickering fires, murmuring crowds, and the occasional distant shout that fades almost as soon as it begins. The city breathes differently now, lighter somehow, less certain, yet filled with a quiet potential for change. Morning dawns, grey and misted again, soft and calm. Trumpets sound faintly from the distance, royal notes, carried gently over the city and the fields. People stir quietly, organizing themselves into loose columns for the journey to Mile End. Tyler, calm and precise, ensures that groups maintain order, representatives speaking softly to coordinate the thousands of voices moving as one. You walk with the Essex group, banners raised gently, listing grievances that are small in their wording but profound in meaning: an end to forced labour, fair courts, the right to hunt in royal forests, a fair measure of taxes. Each banner is a whisper of humanity, each voice a soft declaration of dignity. Mile End, a large field beyond the city walls, stretches out before you, bathed in the muted light of morning. Thousands gather with a quiet, deliberate patience, waiting for the young king to appear. Richard Plantagenet, 14, stands on a raised platform surrounded by guards and nobles, his frame slight and hesitant. The weight of expectation sits heavily on him, though he attempts to appear brave, calm, and in control. Tyler steps forward, his voice soft yet precise, cutting through the ceremonial flourishes of heralds and nobles. His words are measured, each one carrying across the field without strain. He speaks of freedom from enforced labor, fair wages, and accountability for corrupt officials. The crowd listens in an almost meditative hush, each person reflecting quietly on the long journey, the years of hardship, and the delicate balance of hope and fear. Around you, people murmur softly to each other, recounting personal stories, sharing small observations about the lives they have built and lost, the villages they have seen destroyed or abandoned, the quiet courage required to keep moving forward. The air is cool and still, carrying the faint scent of earth and smoke from distant fires, blending with the subtle aroma of bread and wood smoke from nearby encampments. Hours pass slowly in gentle conversation and careful observation. Messages are exchanged. Calm negotiations discussed. The young king listening with the tentative attention of someone learning the weight of responsibility. You notice the way sunlight shifts across the field, brushing the banners and faces with soft light, illuminating eyes lined with effort and determination. The scene unfolds in a rhythm almost like breathing. Inhale, exhale, a careful pause between each movement, each gesture carrying meaning. By late afternoon, a quiet sense of resolution begins to settle. The discussions, deliberate and patient, yield soft victories for the assembled people. They will have fairer wages, some oversight of labor conditions, and a newfound acknowledgement of their role in the fabric of the kingdom. Tyler, calm and composed, reminds the crowd gently that this is only the beginning, that true change requires continued vigilance, quiet reflection, and steady courage. As the sun dips toward the horizon, you walk slowly back to a small campsite near the field, the soft crunch of grass beneath your feet blending with the gentle hum of conversations around the campfire. People share quiet meals, warm tea or simple bread, the flames casting dancing shadows on faces tired but hopeful. Margaret sits nearby, sorting through a few items carefully, her calm presence a soothing anchor amidst the muted bustle of preparation and reflection. The city behind you glows softly, fires flickering here and there, a reminder of the work done and the work yet to come. Night descends gently, stars peeking through soft clouds, the chill of evening settling over the field. You lie down beneath a simple blanket, the gentle murmur of voices and the soft crackle of fire weaving a slow lullaby. The distant silhouette of London rests quietly in the background, a city transformed not by force alone, but by the measured courage and steady persistence of ordinary people who dared to stand together. Sleep comes slowly, easily, carried by the rhythm of gentle breaths, the muted rustle of leaves, and the quiet certainty that the world, however fragile, is now in motion towards something better. "Your Majesty," he said, stepping forward with a quiet steadiness. The morning air hung gently over the fields, soft with the distant hum of waking life. Richard's voice, higher than you expected and still carrying the faint uncertainty of youth, carried clearly across the gathering. He spoke carefully, offering a willingness to hear concerns, to listen to grievances. And so began one of the most extraordinary conversations in English history, a king speaking to peasants not as subjects but as equals, with words that seemed to stretch and linger in the air like smoke from a gentle hearth fire. Tyler spoke with deliberate calm, presenting the demands one by one, each as measured as a heartbeat: an end to serfdom and villanage, freedom for all bondmen, the reduction of rents to fair and reasonable levels, amnesty for those who had resisted, and charters to guarantee these rights for generations yet to come. And to your astonishment, Richard, young and trembling, yet guided by the careful counsel of advisers, agreed to everything, every single demand. The crowd's reaction was slow at first, a murmur swelling into tears and embraces, the soft shuffle of knees pressing into the grass as gratitude found its quiet expression. You felt it too, the strange, surreal weight of history turning in your hands. Serfdom, as if by magic and ink, had ended. Parchment wet with royal seal in the hands of scribes, ready to journey back to every village and town as proof of a world changed. Margaret wept quietly, and you realized your own eyes were wet. Yet even amidst this tender celebration you noticed Tyler's gaze. He was calm, not in triumph, but in calculation, watching the king and his nobles with the careful attention of one who knows that promises given under pressure can easily evaporate once the moment passes. And he was right to be cautious. While charters were being copied and hands shaken elsewhere, the rebellion's more impatient souls had taken matters into their own hands. They had stormed the Tower of London, overwhelming the guards, seeking the men they held accountable for long years of suffering: Simon Sudbury, Archbishop and Chancellor, Robert Hales, the Treasurer, and John Leger, the bureaucrat behind the system of oppression. Each dragged from hiding, each executed with a finality that echoed across the city. The news reached Mile End just as the charter ceremony concluded. Breathless messengers carried tales of towers taken, of heads on spikes, of a rebellion's sharp, sudden edge cutting into history. The celebration grew quiet, uneasy, the weight of reality pressing gently on everyone's shoulders. Richard's face paled, yet he did not flee. He requested another meeting at Smithfield, a quiet acknowledgement that negotiations were no longer the gentle exchange of yesterday, but a delicate, dangerous dance where every word carried consequence. And so the night fell on the camp outside London, with a strange mixture of jubilation and terror. Freedom had been inked on parchment, yet the reality of blood and revolt made sleep fitful and uneasy. The dawn over Smithfield arrived pale and still. The field felt smaller, more confining, its edges dotted with figures waiting, poised, silent. After a week of upheaval, your eyes had learned to read danger as if it were light, to notice distances, to recognize the subtle difference between a nervous soldier and a purposeful one. Richard arrived with more soldiers than yesterday, neat formations intended to reassure. Yet the sense of tension in the air was undeniable. Tyler stepped forward, shoulders squared, aware that compromise was no longer enough. He began to speak, but Richard cut him off with measured authority, his words carrying a chill along the morning breeze. The terms discussed yesterday were sufficient. Return to your homes. The crowd felt it immediately, a sudden contraction of hope. Yesterday's promises, once solid as sunlit stone, now seemed conditional, negotiable. Tyler's voice remained calm, firm. More guarantees were needed, real protections in writing with penalties for betrayal. Richard's response was sharp yet controlled. "We are your king," he reminded them. Demands, he suggested, were not for the likes of them. The field seemed to pause, the soft hum of anticipation stretching in the space between breaths. And then it happened. A sudden violent motion, a sword drawn, and Tyler fell, blood dark against the muted green grass. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then chaos rose in waves, a roaring tide of human sound and motion, and yet Richard acted with a clarity that was almost serene. Spurring his horse forward, he commanded attention, offering himself as both king and captain, guiding the anger of the crowd away from revenge and toward order. Slowly, deliberately, the mob followed him to open ground, where soldiers ringed them in careful precision. Richard's voice carried authority, calm and measured. "Return to your homes," he said. "We are merciful." And in those moments the field shifted subtly, quietly. Some rebels yielded, others hesitated, uncertain, caught between instinct and the gentle force of leadership. The charters, once promises of freedom, faded into the background, a memory of a hope that had been briefly realized. The journey home was long and quiet. 2 weeks of nights spent under the stars, of days hidden in shadows, moving past fields that bore the scars of conflict. Smoke drifted softly from villages, silent reminders of royal wrath. The land itself seemed subdued, as if it too had learned caution. When Little Wickham appeared at last, grey and still under early July skies, the village was altered, not violently but in quiet measures, inspections, lists, questions asked and answered with careful neutrality. Lord Edmund greeted you not with warmth, but with measured scrutiny. Words were exchanged, polite and careful, before the subtle negotiation settled. 18 pence a week, no more claims, no more adjustments. Enough to survive, less than hoped, but far preferable to the alternative. The months that followed carried a fragile quiet, almost fragile enough to lull the mind. Leaders hunted, executed or vanished, charters nullified, the promises of freedom postponed indefinitely. Yet beneath the surface subtle change persisted, like roots growing slowly beneath snow. Work was done with care, but no more. Small accidents, small acts of quiet resistance, rippled through villages. Lords adjusted wages to keep labourers. The church softened its sermons. Merchants paid more to attract workers. Margaret thrived quietly, her shop a small beacon of commerce, her life a gentle reminder of persistence. All around, the world shifted softly, imperceptibly, in ways that would one day become undeniable. And there, by her fireside, sharing ale and stories of what had been and what could be, she spoke the quiet truth, all the fighting, all the dying, and in the end, some of the change arrived anyway. Slowly, quietly, subtly, the world had changed. Not in the grand, dramatic gestures of revolt, but in 1,000 small adjustments, 1,000 whispers of possibility, and as you listened, the fire's warmth mingling with the calm night, you understood that this was the way real change usually comes, gentle, gradual, inevitable. The morning unfolded slowly over the open fields, soft light spilling like liquid gold across the dew-damp grass. You could hear the faint rustle of leaves, the gentle clatter of distant tools, the quiet murmur of the river threading through the landscape. It was a day that promised little drama, and yet, beneath its tranquil surface, something monumental was about to take shape. A single figure stepped forward across the field, shoulders squared but calm, voice carrying steadily across the gathering. "Your Majesty," he said. The words, deliberate and measured, floated in the morning air, warm and steady, as though the day itself were holding its breath to listen. Richard, young and uncertain, stepped slightly forward. His voice was higher than expected, still caught in the delicate stages of youth, yet it rang out clearly. "We are prepared to hear your concerns," he said. There was a hesitancy there, a tremor of fear underlying the careful formality, but also a willingness to engage that few had ever witnessed. Across the centuries, such moments seem almost impossible to imagine. A king, prepared to negotiate not as a monarch above his people, but as a listener among them. And in that moment, it felt as though time itself had slowed, allowing every word, every pause, to breathe, to linger. Tyler began to speak, and his voice carried with the gentle authority of one accustomed to careful reasoning. He presented the demands one by one, each slowly unfolding like a ribbon in the wind. An end to serfdom and villanage, a liberation of all bondmen, rents reduced to fair and reasonable levels, amnesty for rebels, and charters guaranteeing these rights in perpetuity. He spoke carefully, allowing each phrase to sink into the warm air, to reach the ears and hearts of those gathered. And then, to the astonishment of everyone present, Richard agreed. Every single demand, without hesitation, without murmur of dispute. The crowd's reaction began softly, a gentle ripple of disbelief, a few murmured cries, then slowly swelling into tears and embraces. Knees pressed into the grass in gratitude. Some wept quietly, others whispered prayers of thanks, and still others simply stared, overwhelmed, shaking, trying to reconcile what had just occurred with the slow, measured pace of their lives. You found yourself among them, trembling at the magnitude of the moment. A system that had bound people for generations. Serfdom was ended not with bloodshed but with ink and royal seal. Scribes hurried to copy the charters, their pens scratching delicately across parchment that would carry proof of this change back to every village, every town. The world felt fragile, yet infinitely new. Margaret wept softly, her tears glinting in the morning sun, and you realize that your own eyes were wet. Yet even in this celebration, Tyler's gaze was different. He did not join in the jubilation. Instead, he observed, calm and measured, taking in the king, the nobles, the crowd, with a careful watchfulness. He knew, as you began to understand, that promises made under pressure could be fragile, ephemeral things. They could vanish with the passing of a day, the easing of a threat, or the quiet counsel of advisors. And in the spaces between words and gestures he waited, patient, cautious, knowing that history was a subtle game of persistence, timing and attention. While the ceremony of charters unfolded, other events, quieter yet equally significant, were taking place. A group of rebels, impatient with the slow turn of negotiation, had moved with decisive action. They stormed the Tower of London, their movements precise yet ruthless, overwhelming guards who had little time to react. In a series of swift and final acts, men long associated with oppression. The Chancellor, the Treasurer, the bureaucrat, were dragged from hiding and executed. The city, and soon the countryside, would hear of these deeds, carried breathlessly by messengers whose voices trembled with urgency. The charters, wet with royal ink, were now intertwined with the shadows of bloodshed. The moment, previously quiet and celebratory, became heavy, complicated, tinged with awe and unease. When the news reached Mile End, the charter ceremony was ending. Breathless messengers relayed the grim events, towers taken, traitors executed, heads displayed on spikes. The atmosphere shifted almost imperceptibly at first, a gentle tightening of the chest, a low murmur of concern, gradually building into a sense of urgency, celebration and fear, intertwined in the soft, warm morning air. There was no return to the simplicity of petitioning for fair treatment. The day had carried a quiet revolution, both hopeful and bloody. Richard's face, pale yet steady, reflected the complexity of leadership faced with acts of audacious defiance. He did not flee. Instead, he requested another meeting, signaling the delicate continuation of negotiations, a dance of power and persuasion that would stretch into the next day. The night fell upon the camp outside London with an unusual calm. Fires glimmered softly, casting long, lazy shadows across tents and the sleeping fields. The mood was strange, a mixture of jubilation and a subtle terror. Freedom had been promised in royal ink, yet the reality of blood and violence weighed heavily, pressing gently on every soul. As you lay awake, listening to the soft murmur of conversation, the occasional cough, the distant bark of a dog, the world felt both vast and delicate, suspended between promise and peril. Stars dotted the sky, silent witnesses to the sweeping currents of history, the same stars that had once shone over your village, over fields long tended, over days simpler and slower. By the time you reached Smithfield a week later, the field felt different, more enclosed, more constricted. Each corner seemed to hold potential danger, every shadow a possible threat. The rebellion had taught eyes to see subtle signs, an arm poised too carefully, a footfall too deliberate, the way soldiers shifted their weight. Richard arrived not as the frightened boy of before, but with a composed authority, his voice carrying the weight of counsel received during the long night. The soldiers, more numerous and disciplined, formed neat rings around him, protective, yet somehow threatening. Tyler stepped forward once again, calm, measured, aware that compromise alone would no longer suffice. He spoke carefully, his words carrying the weight of reason and history. But Richard, now firm, interrupted. The terms of yesterday were sufficient. Return to your homes. The crowd, sensing the shift, faltered. The hope they had carried gently like a flickering candle, dimmed with the sudden coldness of royal pronouncement. Tyler's voice remained calm yet insistent. Guarantees were necessary, assurances in writing with consequences for betrayal. Richard's words, sharp but controlled, reminded them of hierarchy and order. The field seemed to pause, the tension stretching gently across the air like a taut thread. And then, almost silently, the moment broke. Tyler fell, struck down swiftly, blood dark against the soft green of the grass. Silence stretched, long enough for the heart to notice the stillness, for the mind to absorb the finality. Then chaos rose in waves, soft at first, then loud, as voices swelled, weapons drawn. and in the midst of it, Richard acted with clarity, spurring his horse forward, guiding anger into direction, offering leadership where rage had begun to take hold. "You shall have no captain but me," he called, his voice cutting through the confusion with precise calm. Gradually the crowd followed, moving to open fields, outnumbered yet orderly, a subtle shift orchestrated with quiet brilliance. The words were measured, the commands deliberate. "Return to your homes," he said, forgiveness offered, mercy extended. The crowd hesitated, some nodding, some uncertain, caught between instinct and trust. Charters, once promises of freedom, faded into memory. There would be no peaceful return, no gentle resolution, only the quiet negotiation of survival and consequence. You grasped Margaret's hand, feeling the tremor of shared fear and relief slipping through the edges of confusion, moving towards safety. The world around you carried the echoes of struggle and triumph, but the path ahead was narrow, uncertain, delicate. Travel home was slow and measured, 2 weeks of nights beneath quiet skies, of hiding during the day, of avoiding main roads, where patrols could watch and wait. Smoke drifted lazily from villages, a soft reminder of royal retribution. Fields bore silent witness, punctuated by stillness, charred buildings and the occasional hanging, stark against pale horizons. Little Wickham greeted you in muted shades, grey under early July light. Lord Edmund's eyes were calculating, careful, weighing each word, each gesture. 18 pence a week, he decided finally. No more claims, no more negotiations. Survival, quiet, unremarkable, yet preferable to the alternative. Months followed, slow and gentle, filled with the soft murmur of normalcy. Leaders hunted, executed, or disappeared. Charters nullified, the rebellion, on the surface, erased. Yet beneath, subtle transformations unfolded like roots beneath the frost. Work was done carefully, deliberately, with quiet acts of minor resistance rippling through fields and villages. Lords adjusted wages. The church tempered sermons. Merchants offered better pay. Margaret thrived quietly, her shop a small beacon of continuity and commerce, her life proof of persistence. Slowly, gradually, the world adjusted. Change, subtle and unassuming, seeped into every corner, proving that revolutions need not always be loud to be effective. Sitting by the fireside with Margaret, sharing ale and soft conversation, you reflected on the gentle truth of what had happened. Battles had been fought, lives risked, and yet the world had shifted in ways that could not be undone. Slowly, quietly, subtly, a new order emerged. Not through grand gestures alone, but through the accumulation of countless small adjustments, each one carrying the promise of freedom, fairness, and possibility. And as you listened to the fire's soft crackle, the warmth mingling with the quiet night, you understood something profound. Real change often comes, not with the clamorous roar of triumph, but in the gentle, persistent unfolding of time, patience, and hope. Not through grand gestures, not through dramatic confrontations or sudden thunderous upheavals, but through the steady, persistent, almost imperceptible pressure of ordinary people who refuse to accept the unacceptable. That thought stayed with you as you remembered Tyler lying in the dirt at Smithfield, the morning light dim, his blood pooling quietly on the damp earth. The memory was both sorrowful and strangely luminous. He had died for nothing, and at the same time, for everything. The immediate cause of his death, the rebellion's tactical failures, the miscalculated timing, had faded into history, almost lost. Yet the deeper cause, the idea for which he had truly fought, endured. That idea, fragile yet unyielding, was freedom itself. Not freedom as a word written in ink on a parchment, though those charters still existed and bore witness to what had been claimed. Freedom as a way of thinking, a principle that refused to accept that some people mattered more than others, merely because of the circumstances of their birth. And once such a thought escapes into the world, once it lingers in minds and conversations, whispers in cottages and marketplaces, it becomes extraordinarily difficult to contain, let alone to reverse. Outside Margaret's window, the village stirred in the quiet warmth of evening. Small lights glimmered behind curtains, casting soft rectangles across the snow-dusty streets. Families moved within their homes, performing ordinary tasks, tending fires, preparing supper, checking on children, repairing tools, quietly building lives from the fragments of the past. These were lives that had once been constricted, stifled under the weight of feudal expectations and the lingering shadows of pestilence. Now, they were ordinary and, simultaneously, extraordinary. For the people living them were not serfs or bondmen, even if still modestly poor. They were free. That was no trivial thing. It was everything. Every action, every choice, every mundane moment of daily life carried with it the quiet dignity of self-determination. People could farm the plots they chose, take up trades they wished, learn and teach, negotiate and barter, without waiting for permission stamped in some distant lord's hand. The Black Death had swept across Europe, an unstoppable silent tide that claimed half of the population. Following in its wake, the rebellion, the fervent and desperate protests, had taken hundreds more lives. And yet, from that double tragedy emerged something wholly unexpected, a society in which ordinary people could imagine futures for themselves. The possibilities, once unimaginable, began to unfold quietly, persistently. Someone born in a hovel might, through luck, skill and patience, eventually own land. A widow could open a shop, trade goods, command respect. A peasant could refuse an unreasonable demand from a lord and survive, even thrive. It was not the perfect world that Tyler had envisioned in his fiercest dreams, but it was closer than anyone had dared hope when the first whispers of the plague passed through the village like a cold wind. You reflected on how change comes, quietly at first, then with sudden intensity. The transformation of the world had not been instantaneous. It had crept through daily routines, through markets, fields and workshops, through whispered conversations and slow negotiations. And yet, if one were patient and observant, there were moments when it became undeniable. A shift in perspective, a subtle loosening of old hierarchies, a gentle bending of rigid structures. Sometimes, if one were fortunate, one might witness the very instant when assumptions crumbled, when possibilities that had seemed impossible began to feel tangible. The Black Death had been Europe's greatest catastrophe, a horror so immense it could not be fully comprehended in the moment. But the world that emerged afterward was fertile in ways that the survivors could scarcely have imagined. It was a world where ordinary people mattered, where their efforts and choices bore weight, where the future could be shaped by more than just inherited privilege. And you recognized that this too was a kind of victory. Freedom was no longer an abstraction, it was woven into daily life, visible in the paths people took, in the houses they built, in the decisions they made about work, family, and trade. Margaret had seized these new possibilities with remarkable acumen. Her shop, modest at first, had expanded into a thriving trading business. She dealt in goods from neighboring villages, grains from the fields, crafts from local artisans, and even exotic spices brought by travelers. She employed a small number of workers, compensated them fairly, and cultivated a reputation for honesty and reliability. The village had changed, the market had changed, and Margaret quietly had become a figure of stability and progress. Over a warm drink by the fire, she would speak of it matter-of-factly, her words soft and deliberate, almost hypnotic in their calmness. All the fighting, all the blood, all the deaths. And yet, in the end, many of the goals they had sought had been achieved. Lower rents, fairer wages, opportunity where there had been none. And somehow, miraculously, life had continued. Beyond your village, the larger world had begun to shift in ways that were subtle, complex and transformative. News from Venice and Florence travelled slowly, yet persistently, carried by merchants, letters, and travellers who had glimpsed the extraordinary developments in those distant cities. The Venetians, clever and deliberate, had realized something profound about the plague. It was not simply divine punishment or mysterious malady. It was a transmissible disease, something that could be predicted, monitored, and, to some degree, controlled. They responded not with prayers alone, but with action, isolation, quarantine, organization. Entire islands were devoted to separating the sick from the healthy. Quarantina, 40 days. That period became a standard, repeated across cities and eventually nations. Florence constructed lazarettos. Milan established houses of quarantine. Slowly, cautiously, Europe began to understand that disease was not an unchallengeable fate. Knowledge offered protection, and action became possible. It was a revolution, quiet and almost invisible, yet just as transformative as armies on the battlefield. People were no longer mere victims of circumstance. They could act, they could protect themselves, they could reason, plan and organize to ensure survival. And with that newfound power came a transformation in thought. Your youngest daughter, born 5 years after the rebellion, had grown up expecting logic, patterns and solutions. When disease arrived, she anticipated plans and precautions. When authority spoke, she expected reasoning and evidence. The assumption that life could be navigated, understood and influenced had seeped into everyday consciousness. Children no longer assumed resignation, they assumed action. Art and culture reflected this shift as well. Margaret's grandson apprenticed to a painter who observed the world as it truly appeared, no longer bound solely by the dictates of religious doctrine. Scholars questioned assumptions, investigating the natural world, exploring practical solutions, charting stars, studying medicine, calculating measures, seeking to understand the human condition empirically. Knowledge became power, power became possibility, and possibility became the thread that wove through every village, town and city. Even in your village, subtle changes had become part of daily life. The local priest, Father Michael, emphasized compassion and community service rather than obedience and fear. Lord Edmund, once a rigid master of land and labor, began negotiating with workers, recognizing their agency and bargaining power. Royal tax collectors, formerly aggressive and imperious, now approached with caution, almost apologetically, because everyone remembered past uprisings and understood the consequences of coercion. Power had shifted imperceptibly, from top-down authority to a more dynamic balance, influenced by knowledge, expectation, and necessity. Opportunities abounded in ways unthinkable decades before. Your eldest son had learned to read, carefully passing contracts, observing legal phrasing, and gaining a tool to navigate and influence the world. Your daughter practiced letters by candlelight, sharing news, planning, imagining. Ordinary lives carried extraordinary potential because literacy and agency were now accessible. Roads were repaired by local initiative. Markets thrived with diversity and competition. Merchants competed for labor. Wages slowly rose, and commerce began to reward intelligence, diligence, and reputation. Margaret's trading business, extending across counties, illustrated the new social reality. Workers as partners, fair treatment yielding prosperity, knowledge creating tangible wealth. Education, too, had begun to evolve. Universities, while still selective, admitted students from families previously excluded, valuing curiosity, merit, and talent over birthright alone. Manuscripts proliferated, focusing not solely on theology, but medicine, astronomy, engineering, agriculture, and practical problem-solving. Knowledge became accessible, empowering, transformative. Literacy and skill granted leverage, enabling negotiation, innovation, and subtle forms of agency that had previously been unimaginable. Your family's trajectory reflected these shifts. Your children pursued distinct paths, one marrying into trade, saving to establish a shop, another learning commerce to become independent, the youngest aspiring to medicine to heal rather than bless. Social mobility, though challenging, had become possible. The plague, by its immense destruction, had unintentionally dismantled rigid social hierarchies, granting laborers bargaining power and creating space for agency. The costs had been enormous: 25 million deaths in Europe, shattered families, traumatized generations. Yet from that devastation emerged the seeds of a new society, one where merit could outweigh inheritance, innovation could complement tradition, and voices previously silenced could be heard. Sitting by your hearth in winter, candlelight flickering softly on the walls, you watched your youngest daughter practice her letters, shaping them carefully on paper. 30 years ago, such an ordinary act would have been impossible. Ordinary lives had been constrained by birth, expectation, and rigid hierarchy. Now those lives were expansive, full of possibility. Outside, the village lay blanketed in snow, quiet but alive. Smoke drifted lazily from chimneys, dogs barked in the distance, A lone lute played somewhere nearby, poorly but with determination. Life had returned, altered, enriched, extraordinary in its ordinariness. 30 years had passed since Tyler's fall at Smithfield, since the perilous journey home from London, carrying both hope and the shadow of death. And yet here you were, in a home you owned, raising children who could imagine futures far beyond the limits you had known. The world was different, not perfectly, but in ways that mattered. Catastrophe revealed fragility, rebellion revealed agency, and in the quiet, steady rhythm of daily life, the lessons endured. Ordinary people have intrinsic value. Life can be guided and reshaped. Knowledge and thought are powerful. Possibility is, once tasted, impossible to ignore. And as you bank the fire, secure the shutters, and prepare for sleep, you carry a quiet, gentle certainty. The future now belongs to those who imagine it differently, and the world will never again be the same. "Your Majesty," he says, stepping forward. The voice, soft yet steady, carries across the open field. "We've come to discuss the terms under which your people, every single one, might live with dignity." Richard's voice, higher than you expected, still changing yet clear, fills the morning air. You sense both courage and fear in him. The conversation that follows is unlike any other in English history, a king negotiating with peasants as equals. Tyler speaks carefully, presenting the demands one by one, each a quiet declaration: an end to servitude and villanage, freedom for all bondmen, reduction of rents to reasonable levels, amnesty for all who had rebelled, and charters guaranteeing these rights in perpetuity. Richard listens. Young, nervous, yet well-advised, he agrees to each demand. One by one the crowd realizes what is happening. People weep quietly, embrace softly, fall to their knees, their gratitude palpable but subdued, like a gentle tide washing over the field. Serfdom, centuries old, has ended with nothing more than words on parchment and the royal seal. Scribes immediately begin copying charters, each one destined for a village, a town, a family. They are proof that the old world has died, and a new one has begun. You are handed a charter still wet with ink, the royal seal crisp and official. Freedom is spelled out, both in Latin and English, as tangible as sunrise. Margaret cries beside you, and you find tears of your own slipping quietly down your face. Yet Tyler, always vigilant, does not celebrate. He observes the king and his nobles with a careful, quiet calculation. Promises made under duress, he knows, can be fragile, easily broken once the immediate pressure is gone. His caution is justified. While the charters are being written and hands shaken, other forces are moving in the shadows. Frustrated rebels, unwilling to wait for negotiations, storm the Tower of London. They overwhelm the guards in silence and determination, searching for those responsible for years of oppression: Simon Sudbury, Archbishop of Canterbury and Chancellor of England; Robert Hales, the treasurer who had collected taxes while peasants starved; John Ledger, the bureaucrat who designed the machinery of subjugation. All three are executed on Tower Hill, heads displayed as warnings. The news reaches Mile End just as the charter ceremony concludes. A breathless messenger arrives, stumbling over words that are almost too heavy to bear. The towers are taken, the traitors dead, Sudbury's head displayed. The celebration darkens. The event has shifted from a petition to a full, bloody revolution. Richard, pale yet composed, does not flee. Instead, he requests another meeting at Smithfield the next day. Tyler agrees, aware that the rules of negotiation have fundamentally changed. That night, the camp outside London is filled with a strange combination of jubilation and unease. The lines have been crossed. There will be no middle ground. Tomorrow will determine whether freedom endures or rebellion dies. Smithfield feels different from Mile End. It is smaller, enclosed, claustrophobic, with too many shadows, too many places for armed men to hide. Experience has sharpened your perception. Every guard, every soldier, every shape in the field is measured, weighed. Richard arrives with far more soldiers than the previous day. Formations are tight, polished, ostensibly for protection, yet the feeling of threat is palpable. The king, older in manner though still youthful in years, carries an air of counsel and calculation. Tyler steps forward and tension thickens. His Voice is calm, measured, but firm. Additional terms must be discussed. Richard interrupts. Yesterday's terms are sufficient. Return home, he says, and trouble us no more. The words land like a cold wind. Promises that seemed eternal are suddenly conditional. Tyler's voice grows harder, still steady, still careful. Guarantees are needed, written and enforceable. Richard's voice rises, cutting like steel. We are your king, he declares. You do not make demands. The crowd stirs, restless, sensing the shift. Yesterday they were citizens petitioning for justice. Today they face judgment. Tyler takes a step closer, sweat visible despite the morning chill. We are reasonable men, he says quietly. We shed blood for what is right. We will not go home empty-handed. The tension fractures. Blood. Richard accuses. Tyler responds, while you served yourselves, honest people starved. Between them, a gulf of principle, of vision, and of reality stretches wide, filled with thousands of watching eyes. Then movement, a hand toward a weapon. Before reaction, William Walworth, Lord Mayor of London, draws his sword. Tyler falls, the moment suspended, then disappears, leaving chaos in his wake. The crowd surges, anger raw and immediate. Richard, young yet astute, spurs his horse forward, voice cutting through the tumult. You shall have no captain but me. His words are precise, intentional. The mob pauses, listening, reconsidering. Follow me, he continues, offering leadership, guidance, justice. The crowd, astonishingly, obeys. They move to an open field, surrounded, isolated, where Richard's authority transforms chaos into control. Men of Essex, Kent and Suffolk, he announces, have been deceived. But mercy prevails. Return home, he says, and forgiveness will be granted. Murmurs ripple through the crowd, charters, freedom. The king's smile is thin, eyes cold. Those agreements, made under duress, he declares, are void. There is no peaceful return. Some rebels scatter, fleeing toward the woods and roads. Others attempt negotiation, but royal troops encircle, separating leaders, beginning the transformation of political uprising into criminal conspiracy. You clutch Margaret's hand and slip away, the edges of the field still open, the sounds of swords and shouting fading behind. The journey home takes 2 weeks. Night travel, hiding by day, avoiding main roads, witnessing the countryside's brutal recounting of the rebellion. Smoke rises from supportive villages, bodies hang along paths, burned farmhouses signal reprisals. The king remembers and punishes, holding grudges with precision. Upon arrival at Little Wickham, the village is transformed. Royal commissioners have left lists, questions, and demands. Lord Edmund greets you with calm calculation, evaluating, assessing. You navigate carefully. You were in London, yes, but no evidence incriminates your household. Relief washes over you, tempered with awareness of fragility. The months that follow are quiet, intentionally so. Leaders of the rebellion are hunted, executed, or disappear. Promises of freedom are voided, serfdom postponed indefinitely. Yet beneath the surface, something has shifted. Workers approach fields differently, carrying resentment, subtle resistance, awareness of agency. Even as productivity declines incrementally, the royal treasury strains. Dead peasants do not pay taxes. Fleeing or resentful workers withhold effort. Small rebellions persist in daily choices, quietly, invisibly. Winter brings news. Parliament abandons poll taxes. Enforcement proves too dangerous. The rebellion has failed, officially. Yet the central demand, the spark, the principle, survives. Small victories accumulate quietly. Lords offer better conditions to retain labour. The church preaches justice alongside obedience. Merchants pay wages that were unthinkable pre-plague, not through generosity, but necessity. The natural order has shifted subtly, irreversibly. Margaret prospers. Her shop spans counties, employing fair wages, trading in grain, metalwork, and rare spices. She explains success quietly. Treat workers as partners, build reputation through honesty, satisfy customers, and wealth follows. The village grows, attracting new families, artisans, and ideas. Father Michael preaches compassion and community service. recognizing the limits of command and obedience. Even authority adapts to survive, and yet the world beyond still pulses with change. Venice and Florence implement quarantines, observing disease as something predictable, manageable, controllable. Knowledge becomes power, ordinary people gain agency. Your youngest daughter grows expecting solutions, foresight and reason in the face of sickness and adversity. The world becomes logical, navigable, protective, and deliberate. Art, education, and scholarship flourish. Painters observe reality rather than prescribe it. Universities admit meritorious students regardless of birth. Manuscripts proliferate on practical subjects: medicine, astronomy, agriculture, engineering. Knowledge empowers, enabling negotiation, innovation, and choice. Literacy becomes leverage, a quiet tool of power accessible even to modest households. Your children embody the new possibilities, the eldest marrying into trade, saving for independence, the middle learning commerce to trade, the youngest aspiring to medicine. Social mobility, once unimaginable, becomes attainable. Catastrophe in its devastation created the space for agency. The Black Death had killed 25 million in Europe, destroyed generations, left trauma and grief in its wake. Yet from that devastation emerged unprecedented potential, merit, skill, intelligence, innovation, and human dignity begin to matter alongside birth and inheritance. Sitting by your hearth in 1398, you watch your youngest daughter practice letters by candlelight. 30 years ago, ordinary acts like writing would have been impossible. Now ordinary life is filled with potential. Outside, snow blankets the village. Smoke drifts lazily from chimneys. Dogs bark softly. Somewhere, a lute plays. Life pulses with quiet rhythm, ordinary yet extraordinary. Catastrophe revealed fragility. Rebellion revealed agency. Knowledge and possibility endure. The future belongs to those who imagine it differently. And as you prepare for sleep, the fire banked, the windows shuttered, you carry a gentle certainty. The world will never again be the same, and ordinary lives finally have real worth. When the world begins to make sense, just enough that planning ahead actually works, you feel the warmth of your bed like a small, quiet miracle. The blankets are thick and soft, wool that has been carefully woven, purchased thoughtfully rather than inherited or handed down in some fading, fragile bundle from generations past. There is a reassuring weight to them, a comforting pressure that presses gently over your shoulders, curling around you like the soft embrace of memory and effort combined. Your house, too, is solid, carefully constructed, standing sturdy against the chill of early winter nights. It is a house chosen, not assigned, built, or bought through your own decisions and labors. Each timber and stone a marker of autonomy, a quiet triumph of ordinary life over the randomness of circumstance. These are not luxuries in the sense of gilded rooms or golden fixtures, but they are comforts nonetheless, subtle and deliberate, signs that life has grown soft at the edges, that there is space for ease, that the world has shifted just enough to allow ordinary people to shape it for themselves. As you settle into sleep, your mind drifts gently to tomorrow. The day is ordinary, quiet, predictable, a market day in the next village, the sort of humdrum schedule that might have seemed unattainable even 50 years ago, after the plague reshaped everything. You picture the slow, careful rhythm of it, the wagon rolling along the dirt road, the swish of grain in sacks, the light clatter of coins exchanged at stalls, and the low murmur of conversation among farmers, merchants, and travellers. Perhaps you will stop at the inn for a simple pint of ale, soft and warm, and allow yourself to exchange words with others. Voices gentle, ordinary, human. The conversations are mundane, yes, but they carry within them the small poetry of ordinary life, the shared understanding of neighbours and fellow workers who also survived, who also carved space for themselves within the slowly shifting structure of a recovering world. The Black Death ended 50 years ago, a distant memory now, a shadowed chapter in the story of your world, but one whose echoes linger faintly in every careful decision, every quiet adjustment of life's routines. The rebellion, that audacious and terrifying uprising, failed 30 years ago, leaving behind burned villages and lost lives. a world scarred by consequence. Yet somehow, impossibly, the world they left behind became the world you had hoped for, a life that could be lived with gentle expectation rather than constant fear. Not perfect, never perfectly equal, never fair in any absolute sense, but measurably better. A world in which ordinary people, at least in small but real ways, could shape their futures, could negotiate, could own, could trade, could make mistakes and learn, could plan with the soft confidence that tomorrow would be at least as bearable, if not brighter, than today. You lie in your bed and feel the steady pulse of life around you. The walls of your home are calm and reassuring. You hear the faint creak of timber settling, the soft wind pressing against window panes, the occasional low murmur of someone walking past outside. Even these tiny sounds, ordinary and unobtrusive, carry the reassurance that the world continues in predictable rhythms. Life moves forward gently now, and the constancy of it, the measured pacing, becomes a lullaby of its own. You feel the gentle weight of your choices surrounding you. The decisions that led to this place, this bed, this moment of calm. Everything you did, every risk taken, every careful step along roads both literal and metaphorical, has brought you here. You are here. And that presence, in itself, is a quiet victory. Outside your window, in the muted silver glow of the moon, you imagine the world breathing slowly, evenly, around your small village. Houses, modest but strong, line narrow lanes, smoke drifting lazily from chimneys, curling skyward and fading into the night. Fires are banked in hearths, lamps glow in windows, soft triangles of light spreading warmth into otherwise dark rooms. Children sleep, curled in blankets like the ones draping your own body, and you know they will wake to a world shaped not by sudden catastrophe, not by arbitrary decree, but by careful decisions, slow learning, and the patient labor of ordinary lives. The world hums quietly, consistently, the rhythm of survival transformed into the rhythm of ordinary flourishing. As sleep presses against your eyelids, you let your thoughts drift to markets and work, to the tangible patterns of life that were impossible before the plague, before the rebellion, before everything had been torn apart and reassembled slowly, cautiously, carefully, like clay on a potter's wheel. Grain is sold and bought, tools are mended or sharpened, work begins with sun and ends with dusk. There are quiet conversations, soft laughter, the gentle exchange of news and the occasional sigh of contentment, all forming the steady, unremarkable, reassuring texture of daily life. These are the ordinary miracles, the soft victories, the quiet triumphs that signal not grand revolutions, but durable, lasting change. You think of your children, their soft breathing, their dreams forming quietly in the safety of this home. Each one carries a fragment of possibility, a trace of the world that now exists and will continue to expand. Your eldest daughter, already clever and alert, sketches letters with careful hands, practicing the shapes that form words, thoughts, and ideas, a privilege once unimaginable for someone of her station. Your sons, each with their own small ambitions, explore trade, craft, and knowledge. Their futures are not dictated by birthright alone, but shaped, gently and deliberately, by the possibilities that survive and grow in the calm aftermath of catastrophe. Even Margaret, her life intertwined with yours, reflects quietly on what has been gained. Not through violence or spectacle, but through patient persistence and careful choices, the ordinary structures of life have shifted. Trade flows steadily, markets hum, labor carries value. People, though weary and cautious, carry with them an unspoken understanding that they possess a measure of agency, that tomorrow will not necessarily crush them under the weight of arbitrary authority. And this is a revolutionary gift, subtle and pervasive, coursing through lives as gently as blood through veins, invisible yet undeniably present. Outside, the village exhales quietly under the weight of night. Dogs curl in the snow, their breath soft clouds in the cold air. Trees sway gently, their limbs moving in rhythms older than any human design. The moon traces pale paths across thatched roofs, over fences, and along the soft, uneven lanes. You can almost hear the world itself sigh, as if settling into a long, slow exhale after centuries of upheaval. And in that sigh you recognize the deep, calm certainty of continuity, of ordinary survival, of life persisting softly and steadily despite everything. The lessons of the plague and the rebellion unfold quietly in the rhythm of these nights. Catastrophe taught fragility, rebellion demonstrated possibility. Choices, patience, and persistence create structures stronger than fear or coercion ever could. The small gestures of everyday life, the care taken in weaving blankets, in sharpening tools, in keeping a ledger, in tending a field, in speaking kindly to neighbors, carry power over time, shaping the contours of existence in ways both subtle and profound. These quiet rhythms, repeated day after day, season after season, become a lullaby of their own, coaxing you into sleep with the soft insistence of normalcy returned and redefined. And you know, even in the hazy half-consciousness that precedes slumber, that your own story is part of a larger unfolding narrative. Not one of kings and crowns, of laws enforced by violence, of grand gestures that might change a single day, but of the patient, quiet accumulation of small decisions made by ordinary people who simply refuse to accept lives dictated entirely by the accidents of birth, by the whims of plague, by the cruelty of those who once held power. That refusal has rippled outward, through years and decades, shaping communities, villages, and even cities, creating a new world, gentle and resilient, not perfect, not absolute, but real, enduring, and deeply human. Sleep presses closer now. Your breath slows. Thoughts drift like the soft, pale smoke from the village chimneys. Markets, trade, children, hearth, blankets, wool, stone walls. Ordinary, enduring elements that now carry the weight of freedom, the quiet significance of survival and choice. Outside, the moon moves slowly across the sky, silver light spilling over sleeping roofs, curling around doors, tracing the edges of fences, illuminating the calm persistence of life continuing in gentle rhythms. The world, fragile, unpredictable as it once was, has softened in ways that were once unimaginable. Ordinary days are now remarkable in their constancy. Small victories accumulate imperceptibly, unnoticed in the moment, yet forming the architecture of a life that can be lived with confidence, expectation, and quiet joy. You feel the profound satisfaction of agency, the gentle triumph of choice, the simple, enduring power of being able to shape the contours of your own existence. And as sleep finally overtakes you, there is no tension, no fear, no sharp edges. Only the slow, steady pulse of a life lived in a world that has been quietly, persistently transformed. The blankets are soft, the house warm, the future possible. You drift, gently, into dreams that carry the calm weight of safety, of ordinary triumph, of lives and communities resilient enough to endure, strong enough to thrive, and quiet enough to let you rest without fear. Tomorrow will come, as it always does, and it will be shaped by the soft, steady accumulation of human care, human persistence, human choice. The Black Death, the rebellion, the struggles of decades past, they echo softly, no longer as terror or loss, but as the gentle, persistent force that made your life possible. And here, at last, you sleep. In a world shaped by catastrophe and human ingenuity, in a life carefully constructed through ordinary decisions, in a future quietly built on hope and persistence, you rest. The world hums softly around you, breathing, enduring, persisting, and you drift deeper into the comfort of ordinary, enduring, miraculous life.